right, guys.
Well, good evening, church. It's good to be back with you. This class started way back there in 2025, and seems like it's been longer than it really has. Been a couple of weeks, but I'm anxious to dive into the material tonight. If you've been in this class for the previous sessions, we're talking about intergenerational and cultural challenges that the church faces today. And we're going to spend most of the time on the generational aspect. We're going to look at some different topics tonight. We're going to start by looking at some solutions and looking at some of the more tangible, practical elements of this whole topic. We spent the last two sessions looking at data and information about the impact of these generational challenges and cultural challenges that we face in the church today. And we looked at some pretty alarming statistics about the demographics within churches today. And so the problem is, it's fairly self-evident. There's a lot out there that points to some issues that we have as it relates to not only understanding our culture, but understanding one another. Tonight we're gonna look at and just quickly, I wanted to leave these up here for just a moment as just a reminder of what we're trying to do. What's our objective with this discussion? Some of the folks that are a little more data savvy and technical, you may just find this an interesting topic just because. But the real heart of the issue is getting to a greater level of understanding and transitioning what I call multi-generational churches, where you've got multiple generations worshiping together and serving the Lord together, to an intergenerational church where those generations are actively participating in things together, where they're building relationships across generations. And there are some congregations that do a really good job of that. There are others that struggle with it. And it seems to, and I'll go ahead and mention this, it seems to mask itself in numbers, okay? You take a congregation this size where there's 600, 700 people together once a week, and you have, there's just, things are so broad that it really kind of masks itself in the size. The smaller churches tend to have a more evident issue with this. It's not unusual to go to a church of 50 to 100 to 150, and you see the gaps. You see the different generations that just aren't represented there. And if you talk to leadership in those congregations about that, it's alarming to them. What are we going to do? What do we do 20 years from now? I've been working with a group out of Sunset, International Bible Institute, for quite a bit over the last several months, as we're putting together some elder training, shepherd training. We're going to get a couple more weeks before we go real public with that and announce it. But we're really excited about the opportunity to intentionally build the next generation such that we have elders and deacons ready, and ministers and Bible class teachers and so forth. But tonight we're going to focus in on leadership and look at some of the issues and differences that exist. We spent some time in the first session talking about generations in general, the characteristics of them, and how we did spend some time looking at how they're different. Tonight what we're going to look at is specific issues that create conflict, or that create potential conflict, the potential for that. And so we're going to look at, and going to run through this material pretty quick. And by the way, there's been 3 or 4 of you that have asked me for this material, and I'm gonna get that to you. Those that ask, if you would like it and you haven't told me that you want to receive it, just shoot me a note or catch me on the way out or whatever. The issue for discussion tonight is leadership. And I wanted to talk a bit about, as we kind of lay the groundwork for where we're headed tonight, wanted to talk a bit about generations and within leadership in your average Church of Christ. I did a very unscientific, very small case size, study size. I mean, it's just kind of winged it a bit. Reached out to about 15 congregations across Arkansas. Most of them had had more than 2 elders. Most of the congregations, they were moderate in size, anywhere from a couple of hundred up to about 500 or 600. And I just did an informal survey about the makeup of their leadership from a generational perspective. 92% of the elders across those 15 churches were either traditionalists or baby boomers. So only 8% of the elderships, of the leadership in those congregations, are of the younger generation, either Generation X or Generation Y. And so where that leads us is, and by the way, not a single one of those 15, not one of those 15, and we're talking about some of the larger churches in Arkansas in a few cases, none of them had an intentional plan for leadership succession. None of them had a plan where they were actively going out and identifying those younger men who they wanted to train and prepare for leadership. Now, that doesn't mean it doesn't happen on an informal basis. It doesn't mean that there's not classes held occasionally for that, but there's very few churches of Christ today that have intentional leadership succession plans. And I believe personally that's it's one of our greatest weaknesses as a brotherhood, is we're not intentionally identifying those men and their families and preparing them for leadership as we should. A lot of this is, everything I say tonight is general in nature. None of it is directed to this congregation or any other congregation in particular. What I'm talking about tonight is general information that if you went out in most congregations, you would find symptoms of this. And in many cases, the generations, and I've debated all day about whether or not to throw it out like this. In many cases, you have generations that are scared of one another, okay? They're just a little bit scared of one another. I'm going to be referring tonight to 2 different groups of generations, 2 cohorts. One is the traditionalists and the boomers. I'm going to refer to them as cohort number 1, or the older. I'm going to use the O word a lot tonight. And then the second cohort are those Generation X and Generation Y. So you're talking about individuals in that second group that were born between the years of 1965 and 2000. And we're beginning to see more and more Gen X, those individuals that were born between 65 and 1980, stepping into leadership roles. But to be candid about it, you've got these two generations, these two cohorts that need a deeper level, better understanding of each other. And an intentional way to understand each other better and to know with a high level of confidence that things are as they should be, okay? From a doctrinal perspective, from a judgment perspective, from a lot of the social and cultural issues that we face, that everybody understands what the other believes, okay? And so that's really what ultimately it's our purpose is bridging that gap. So I want you to keep in mind as we go through this data, and I'm going to fly through it pretty quick because there's a lot to cover, but I want you to understand there's no right and no wrong, okay? It's not a matter of saying, well, this generation is right and the other one is wrong. That's not the case, okay? I've for years, I've used a personality assessment called Berkman, the Berkman method. Some of you are familiar with that. And it's a great tool to illustrate differences between two individuals. And it's so important when you're doing that kind of exercise, when you're sitting down with a couple or two coworkers or whatever the situation might be, to look at their differences. There is no right or wrong. And so as we go through this, especially if you're looking at it through the lens of your generation, try your best to avoid saying, yeah, that nails those folks, and if they just get on board, we'd be okay. All right? So try to avoid doing that as much as you can. I know it's our nature to do that. It's our nature to feel a little bit like we're defending our own way of thinking or thought process or whatever. But try your best to kind of look at this objectively. So I'm going to dive right in, and you'll see the pattern here. There's 7 different components of this that we're going to look at tonight. Different areas where there could be potential conflict between the two cohorts. So you can see the chart there, the older cohort, as I described it, and the younger. And this first thing that we're going to look at here is authority and decision making. So you'll notice there, the older generation, my generation and the one ahead of me, okay? Authority is often granted with a title. It conveys with a job role or a job title. And there is, for the older generations, that authority just kind of goes along with the office that you fill. When you fill that seat, you automatically, as far as the way those older generations think, the authority kind of comes along with that. The younger generations, not so much, okay? They want you to earn the relationship. They want you to earn their trust. They want that to be a process that's ongoing. And so authority is not always just simply handed to someone because of their title. There's a saying among the younger generations, and some of you in the workplace, you've probably heard this. This meeting could have been an email, okay? How many of you heard that lately? This meeting could have been an email, okay? The older cohort tends to want to be together. They tend to centralize decision making. They tend to be together and discuss things, and is by nature, they tend to do that among themselves. And so the potential exists there for a decision to be made. And if you're part of that younger cohort and you're wanting a decision, then the decision gets made and you don't understand anything about how they arrived at that decision. You weren't involved in the discussion. You weren't involved in the dialogue. You didn't have the opportunity to debate this particular, a decision just gets made and that's it. And for the younger generation, that's a challenge They want collaboration. They want discussion. They want dialogue about whatever it is that you're talking about and making a decision about. And so as it relates to authority and decision making, this is huge, okay? And I'm not covering, as you'll see as we go through these, I'm not covering all the differences between generations. I pulled out some that I feel like are potential areas of conflict. And as it relates to authority and decision making, there's some real issues there. The results of this are the younger cohort views the older as controlling and resistant to change. And the younger cohort is viewed by the older generations as being dismissive of tradition, of structure, of hierarchy, protocol, those types of things. And you can see, hopefully, with this first one, where the rub is, okay? Where the generational challenges come in, because you have these two that really don't understand each other in a lot of ways, and their actions unintentionally end up frustrating each other. And so that's the process we're going to kind of go through as we look at these 6 or 7 different areas. Next one is pace of change. Generally speaking, the older cohorts, those two generations tend to think by the maxim, and I'll use this term, deliberation equals wisdom, okay? Deliberation equals wisdom. You go slow. Take it slow, make a slow, take your time in making a decision, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like I said, there's no wrong or right with this. It's who you are. It's who we are as a generation. The younger cohort is not nearly as concerned with the phrase, "this is how we've always done things." Okay? They look at the way things are going and evaluate that through the lens of, is it effective? Is this working? Okay? Is this accomplishing our objective? It's been about 10 years ago, I hired a young man who to work in the project office that I was leading, and he was younger than both of my kids. And it was the first time I'd hired somebody that was that much younger than me. And he was your prototypical member of Gen Y, okay? That's the one that has the M word that I don't use, all right? And Corey was an immensely talented young man, but he was so anxious to grow and so anxious to do the next thing and to make an influence. And I found myself from time to time having to bite my tongue and say, slow down. I didn't want him to slow down necessarily, but I was trying to find ways to harness that energy and that passion that he felt about his profession. And eventually, and I not long after I hired him, I told Lisa, he's not going to be around long. Not because he doesn't like me, not because he doesn't like Delta Dental, not because he didn't like our boss or whatever. He was simply going to outgrow where we were and the need that we had in that particular organization. And sure enough, a little less than 2 years, he moved on, and he's taken another couple of jobs, and he's leading the project management organization for J.B. Hunt, and accomplished all that in about 10 years. Okay, so that's your younger generation. They're not as concerned with the way we've always done things. They will ask the question, will it work? Is it profitable? Okay? And here's the results of that. The older cohort feels rushed many times. They feel like we're hurrying toward a decision that may result in instability, that may result in poor decisions, and we're going to talk a little bit about failure a little bit later and how the two generations view failure. The younger generation is going to feel choked, okay? They're going to feel like they're stalled, maybe even constrained into doing some things that aren't profitable. We're doing them for the sake of doing them. And so pace of change is a huge issue for this particular issue. Communication. Again, back to my statement about this meeting could have been an email, okay? The younger generation embraces, I guess would be a good term for that, informality. They're not as hung up on the formal discussions. My generation, our generation as the older cohort, meetings are a thing, okay? Meetings are a thing. We meet a lot. I know sometimes that for the younger folks, that there's a rub there. Is meeting as efficient as it could be? But I think it goes deeper than just being together in meetings, okay? And I've done this before, and I'll probably do it some more. My dad's here tonight, and I'm going to use us as examples from time to time, and I may use my wife or whoever, might use Daniel or Brittany over there, I don't know. But occasionally, I'll send Dad a text and say, hey, here's something I've been thinking about, what do you think? And most of the time, if it's a real serious question that I'm asking, if it's a real serious decision to be made, you know what's coming next? Can you come over? Now, you got to understand, we live 15 feet apart. There's literally 15 feet between our houses. So it's not, I don't have to call or whatever. I just walk out the door, and in about 30 steps, I'm sitting there on his couch. Okay? That is a good illustration of the older and younger generations and how they communicate. That asynchronous messaging, okay? It's not at all unusual to send a young person, people from those younger generations that I'm talking about, or even Gen Z, which is those that are college age. You send them a text, you may not hear from them for a day, okay? You may not hear from them for a good long period of time. And they have the ability to kind of pick up that conversation at that point and just continue the discussion. Where older people tend to want that answer now, or if a day goes by, you don't even remember what you texted them about, okay? So that asynchronous, that method that they have, you got to understand these younger generations, especially Gen Y and Gen Z, grew up with technology. It's natural to them. It's as natural to them as breathing. Where those of us in the older generations that use technology for messaging and communication like that, it's a learned thing, okay? It's something that we have to spend some time really experiencing. I want to talk just a little bit about how commands get communicated. Now, commands that's kind of a negative word, right? So, but I remember years ago, there was a guy I was talking to. He was this was in a little country church. He had just become a deacon, hadn't been a deacon very long at all. And one of the elders called him. The elder was probably old enough to be his grandfather. And he said, I need you to do this and this and this. It had to do, I believe, with benevolence, with getting some help to somebody. And he said, I want you to do these things. And this new deacon said, I didn't have a clue how to do any of that. You know, I just become a deacon. I didn't know what I was authorized to do, whatever else. And he said, so I asked him, can you help me out? And his answer was, No, I'm running my coon dogs tonight. This is all on you, okay? Now, both of them were great guys, a great elder, a great deacon who today is an elder, but he was looking for something more warm, compassionate, a little more understanding, and what he got was, here's what needs to get done. Boom. Go figure it out. Go do it. Now, again, there's no right and no wrong there. It is simply differences in styles, differences in communication styles and communication abilities. So this particular one is, as it relates to leadership, is really a big one. And it really takes effort on both parties, both cohorts, to understand the other and to bridge those gaps and ask clarifying questions or whatever it may be. You have to have that collaboration. You have to have that desire to fix the issue before it becomes conflict and before it becomes a problem. So the results on this one, the older cohort sees the younger as way too casual. They're not, they perceive them to be without a plan. They're making it up as they go along, doing the Indiana Jones thing. If you've never heard that, you know what I'm talking about. So the Indiana Jones movie, the first one, Raiders of the Lost Ark, they started filming, the script was about half written. And there is a line in the movie where one character asked Indiana Jones, asked Harrison Ford, what are you going to do? And he says, I don't know, making this up as I go along. And that was an inside joke, okay? That's often how the older cohort views the younger one. The younger cohort often views that older group as unapproachable. They may even be the communication vacuum. You ask them for a question, you ask them for direction, and it goes into a black hole and nothing comes out for a long period of time. And that frustration then begins to build because those two groups are not communicating openly. Loyalty and commitment. You remember one of the examples I used when I was the first lesson when we were talking about how generations are different. And I mentioned that traditionalists and baby boomers tend to spend a lot of time, a long working life with either one employer or a very limited number of employers. Okay, and I use myself as an example. I really had 4 jobs, one of which was working for myself. Okay, in a 44-year window, I had 4 different jobs. Spent 27 years at one company, about 8 or 9 at a couple of others. My son-in-law, I'll let you figure out which one. my son-in-law he and Kendall have been married for, Lisa help me, 11 years, is that right? 14 years, be 15 in June. And I think he has had 7 or 8 different jobs in 15 years. Now, he did that based on the fact that loyalty means something different to him than it does me. He's as loyal an employee as anybody in my generation, including myself, would ever be. But he's not going to be loyal at the expense of himself and his family. And so when it's time to move on from one job to the next, they do it. No big deal. They change employers, change jobs, take a new job role, whatever that might be. My generation, we agonize over that, okay? We agonize over, man, what's going to happen to this employee? Well, you know, if I had to do over again, the 27 that I worked for that one company would have been about 10, okay? Because I stayed much longer than I should have. So you see here the differences in these two. Loyalty is for that older cohort is tenure. It's long-term service. It's being faithful in our way, being faithful to a cause or a job or whatever. Questioning leadership. Those of us in the older cohort, if someone questions us, we tend to take that personal. Okay? We tend to feel like you're questioning me. You're questioning my integrity. You're questioning my judgment. When in reality, the younger generations, that younger cohort, questioning is their way of getting data. Okay? It's their way of getting information, of getting clarification. They don't mean anything personally. The young man I mentioned earlier, very early when he went to work for the organization that I was a part of, and we were working together, and I was his manager, this happened. And I got a little defensive about something. And Corey just blurted out, this doesn't have anything to do with personal things, okay? I'm not questioning you personally. I'm not, don't make it personal. And it became such that he would use that term fairly often with me. Now, this is not personal. I'm going to ask you something, but it's not personal. Okay, he would, and we had a great relationship and worked really well together. But so some of the results here, the older cohort may, in some cases, perceive the younger as not being committed, not being bought in, and the younger cohort may feel unfairly judged in those circumstances when they're asking for feedback, when they're asking for clarification, and they're not getting that, or they get a negative reaction from that. They feel unfairly judged by that. This bleeds a little bit over into decision making, in that the older cohort tends to have the mindset, we need to be together before we can make a decision. Okay? I've known elderships that would say, we can't make a decision tonight because somebody's not here. And so if you're that member of that younger cohort who's looking for that direction, you want an answer quick because you're chomping at the bit to get out and go to work and do something, and you get, well, we couldn't make a decision because Tom wasn't here or Fred wasn't here or whatever. That you can see where the potential for conflict comes in that situation. Leadership development. I touched on the fact very few churches have an intentional plan for leadership succession. The older cohort tends to embrace the idea that leadership development, it's on the job, okay? I remember the first time I was asked to be a deacon here at Robinson Center back in 1989, and one of the elders that I had a world of respect for came and talked to me, and he said, now you'll make a good elder someday, but you need quite a bit of time as a deacon. Okay? And I thought, what? In my mind, I was thinking apples and oranges. Okay? Leadership is not servant, not service. Okay? You've got deacons who are focused on service. You got leaders who are shepherds. And in my mind, now I didn't ask him that. I didn't feel comfortable going down that path, but in the back of my mind, that's what I was thinking. These are two totally different things. Now, is it profitable and biblical for someone to be proven? You bet. That'll preach. It's right out of the Word. But leadership development is not time. Leadership development, the younger cohort want to develop at their pace. Okay, back to the example of the young man that I work with. He's doing things creatively and with agile project management, things like that I don't even understand. Now, I was a project manager for nearly 30 years. He's taken that to a level that I never practiced. And so at 35 or whatever he is today, he's probably a much better project manager than old Marty was at 61 or 2, okay? Now that's, again, nothing, no right, no wrong there. And one thing I want to, and I'm trying my best to avoid addressing one generation versus the other, but I do want to say this to my older, my fellow members of the older cohort. Mentoring is not simply saying, do it like I do it. Okay, and there's a lot in my generation and the one that's ahead of us that need to hear that. Mentoring is about developing a lot of different things, a lot of critical thinking and interpersonal skills and a lot of those kinds of things. It's not as simple as just saying, here's how you do this, watch me and learn. There was a quote I ran across today by William Arthur Ward. It said, a moderate teacher tells, a good teacher explains, a superior teacher demonstrates, and a great teacher inspires. I know there's probably a lot of you out there heard that quote before. And that's really, as leaders, we should want that younger generation to be inspired. It's not about just telling them what to do. It's not even about just demonstrating what to do. It's about giving them the experience and the model of how to be inspired and how to grow as a potential leader. Some results out of this one: the older cohort may see the younger as too impatient. Okay, they're in a hurry. They need time. Slow down. The younger generation may feel like I'm undervalued. You're not investing in me. You're not preparing me for anything. You're overlooking me, and that frustrates a lot of people in the younger generations. Risk and failure. I'm going to be candid on this one. The older cohort, and I'm a part of that. Failure is not an option. Okay, failure's bad. Failure is negative. Our generation looks at that as a no-no. The younger cohort looks at failure as a learning tool. Okay, they're using failure as a way to determine, well, something didn't work this way. Let's try it again. I've got a son-in-law over here who's an engineer, and he's got that mindset, okay? And I watched, it's been a few years ago, I was watching him and his dad and my grandson, and they were working on a car door, I think it was. And they were all just sitting there totally absorbed in that. And I watched them for about 10 seconds and had to leave because I don't have that mindset. I don't think like that, okay? But the younger generation, it's good that they're this way. They look at failure as a way to learn. And so innovation is an experimentation for that younger cohort. It's a natural part of life. Let's try this. If it doesn't work, we'll throw it out and try something else. Where the older cohort tends to feel like failure is awful, okay? This program didn't work. We don't ever want to try that again. I knew an elder one time. I was a deacon at the congregation, and someone raised the point. We were doing strategic planning for the year. We need to hire a youth minister. And he said, no. We hired a youth minister about 25 years ago, and it was terrible. So? So what? It's about right now, okay? It's about the need right now. And yet sometimes that rub comes in. The results here, the older cohort may look at the younger as reckless. They're especially, and we're going to talk about this in some of the coming weeks, especially with the reputation of the church at stake. And so that's a bit of a trigger. The younger generations will often look at the older folks as being paralyzed by fear. Okay, 25 years ago, the youth minister situation didn't work out, so we never need to do that again. That's probably not the best way to approach that thought process. Power and influence. This is really the last one that I wanted to talk about. To fully understand this one, I think you have to take an important. It's important that we take a look at influence and power in our culture. And when I say our culture, I'm talking about the good old US of A. Okay, how many of you, show of hands, how many of you believe the first Europeans that came to America came because they were looking for religious freedom? Show of hands. Okay? I'm going to take you back to 1620. All right? I found out a few years ago I had 3 ancestors on the Mayflower. So I'm talking about 2 11th great-grandfathers and a 12th great-grandfather. Okay? Came over, arrived in September of 1620, supposedly for religious freedom. You know what they did first? They built a church and then built a wall around the town to keep everybody out of their church. Now, I'm not making that up. That's real. They left England because the Church of England and the king would not let them worship as they wanted to worship, so they left there and went to Holland. Okay, they went to the Netherlands, lived there. That wasn't good enough. They decided we'd get on a ship and take 60 days to go all the way to a different continent so that we could build our walls and keep everybody out. Now, folks, that's reality. So it wasn't about religious freedom nearly as much as it was about guarding our way. Now, do the shepherds in Scripture have responsibility? Are they accountable for guarding the flock? You bet. Nearly every reference to elders and shepherds in the New Testament talks about guarding the flock, protecting the flock, taking care of those in your charge. But that's not all there is to it. That's not all there is to it. The younger cohort tends to look at the older as the gatekeepers. Okay, they're the guardians. Nothing happens unless they give us a thumbs up. And what that younger cohort is looking for every day in their jobs, in their marriages, in their hobbies, in their faith, they're looking for collaboration. They're looking for leadership that engages them and gives them a voice. And so out of all these, I think this one may be the one that has the highest potential for conflict, and it's the one that probably needs work as much as anything else, probably more so than any of these others we've looked at. The results of this are that younger cohort feels shut out. They feel disregarded. They don't feel like they have a voice. And so it's the responsibility of the older cohort as the leaders, as the elders of today, to help them feel like they're engaged. Now, you don't accomplish that by, if you're that older cohort, by just simply disregarding your responsibility as a guardian, as a shepherd, as the protector of the flock. But it's real easy for us, and I've been there, I've been that individual, been that elder in that position where you feel like the actions of the younger are undermining you. They don't value me. They don't appreciate the sense of responsibility that I have. They don't feel the weight of the role of shepherd. And so again, both generations look at each other. Try to find that level of understanding that you have to bridge those gaps. That doesn't happen in an elders and deacons meeting twice a month or once a month. That doesn't happen with very rigid formal communication. That happens through relationship building, through getting to know one another and appreciating each other. I'm so excited about the future and the work that I'm going to be doing with a couple other guys. I'm speaking out at Lubbock on the part of their vision workshop later this month on the topic of leadership succession. And all of these things that we're talking about, I'm going to go back and say it again. I think these generations are scared to death of each other sometimes. And it may be doctrinal, it may be judgment, it could be any number of things, but I do believe that we're in a position where cohorts of generations are scared to death of one another. So let's build those bridges. Give that some thought. Pray for your elders. Pray for those that are going to be elders 20 years from now. I began when Cassie was born 19 years ago, praying for her husband. I don't have a clue who that's going to be, but I've been praying for that guy for a long time. Pray for the people that are going to be your elders here at Robinson Center 20 years from now. Do that every day. Challenge you to do that. I've got a couple of sets of questions that are in the material. These are the questions that would serve as discussion points in a workshop type format. So those, if you ask for the material, I'll send those and you can look those over. They're not at all profitable and helpful in an environment like this, but those questions are there. Next week, we're going to take on a fun one. We're going to talk about sex and gender and transgender stuff, okay? We're going to talk about all of that, package all that up, homosexuality, sexual immorality, a lot of that's going on today. So we're going to kind of run through this same format next week on that topic, and I hope you'll be here. Let's close with a prayer. Father, thank you for the day you've given us, the beautiful day you blessed us with. We're grateful for the opportunity to be together as a spiritual family. We ask that you'd be with each and every one of us as we leave here. Bring us back Sunday to worship you. Father, we're grateful for your Son, and it's through him we pray. Amen.